Are you interested in how emerging leaders see the future of cities? What do you think about youth engagement for better urban futures? How can we utilize challenges as opportunities? Stay tuned for answers from Jarrett Lash, Mathilde Boulogne, Gabriel Monteiro, and Sungkur.
What is the future for cities? Do you want to learn more about them? Do you want to know how others think about them? Do you want to be part of the conversation? Then this is the right place.
Welcome to What is the Future for Cities podcast. This episode is a panel discussion where I invited emerging leaders to share their vision for the future of cities. The panelists, Jarrett Lash, Mathilde Boulogne, Gabriel Monteiro, and Sungkur, talked about the fears and opportunities they see regarding the future of cities, community engagement, sustainability, youth involvement, and many more. So let's start with a proper introduction. Jarrett Lash is the township planner for Upper Merion Township, Pennsylvania, where he leads long-term economic and community development, including managing private sector projects through the land development process. Upper Merion is home to the third largest mall in the US and the historic Valley Forge National Historical Park. Jarrett also served on the Montgomery County Homeless Task Force and the Youth Housing Coalition's Youth Advisory Board. Previously, he was a founding member of the RSL Homes, focused on affordable housing development through modular construction. He holds a BA in International Politics from NYU, with global study experiences in Paris, Shanghai, and Abu Dhabi. Mathilde Boulogne is a master's student in international relations at IRIS SUP, currently working as a public relations officer at the Paris Peace Forum. She has a passion for youth engagement, children's rights, and education, actively participating in initiatives such as Their World. Her international experience includes attending education summits and completing an exchange semester in Mexico, where she developed a strong interest in the Afro-descendant cause in Latin America. Mathilde is dedicated to amplifying the voices of French overseas youth and is eager to connect with like-minded individuals working towards these goals. Gabriel Monteiro is a dynamic professional with a legal background and 2 years of expertise in ESG. As an ESG analyst, he helped 170 companies enhance their sustainability efforts, produced 2 GRI reports, and exceeded stakeholder engagement goals by 146%. As a consultant for Brazil's largest energy company, he assessed 35 international sustainability standards and produced a 40-page due diligence report. Currently completing his master's in international law and global governance at the University of Leeds, Gabriel specializes in sustainable reporting frameworks, including EU taxonomy and GRE, with a focus on their legal relevance. Sungkur is a passionate Mauritian youth climate advocate, focused on addressing climate change's impact on small island developing states. Pursuing a master's degree in global environmental governance, Youth has spoken at major international summits, including the 16th UN Climate Change Conference of Youth in Glasgow and the Transforming Education Pre-Summit in Paris. He is also the president and co-founder of Food Water Hygiene Mauritius, a youth-led humanitarian NGO providing basic necessities to those in need. Youth is committed to bridging the generational gap in climate action through youth engagement and advocacy. And with that, Jarrett, Mathilde, Gabriel, and Youth, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's so exciting to be here and have this conversation with you. I'm so interested in what will come out of this conversation as you being new and emerging leaders, just forming the future we want to have. As a founding question, I would like to ask you individually, what does the city mean to you? And Jarrett, may I ask you to start with this answer?
Happily. I do want to preface that any perspective that I share is solely my own, not reflective of my employer or any other outside organization with which I'm involved. I do just want to say that to me, the city is just a dynamic place. I grew up in a pretty classic American suburb that is most notably seen as a single family home sprawling area, but had the lovely opportunity to be able to go to New York City for university, thereafter live in a small town, and I live in a mid-sized town on the outskirts of Philadelphia right now. And in each of these different places, the typologies of the built environment really breed the type of experience that people have in those places, the ways that they interact with each other. And that personally led me on this journey to try to understand more in depth about the way that our zoning laws in the United States create the built environment that we enjoy and don't enjoy today. And so when I think about cities, I really do think about those invisible laws, those invisible zoning laws that dictate how things are built, where they are built. Because at the end of the day, where we live is indicative of so many predictive outcomes, whether that be an individual's financial stability as it relates to housing affordability, whether it relates to other predictive outcomes of educational opportunity, health disparity. And invisible laws of zoning can have so many downstream effects, but they ultimately compile together to create these dynamic places that people try to do their best in, provide opportunity in. So to me, the city is a living, breathing place that is trying to work within the overall framework of what the zoning from an underlying perspective permits.
Thank you, Jarrett. Gabriel?
Well, I think, what does a city mean to me? It's a great question, of course. And I think as someone who lived in two different cities, Recife in Brazil, which is my home city, and now Leeds in the UK, my understanding of what a city truly means have definitely evolved. So coming from Recife, which is a city which is very alive with culture and a strong sense of community, it helped me build my foundation. And the familiar streets and the humid weather, the buzz of everyday life, that's what city life meant to me back then. And it provided me with this first sense of what is a place and what is belonging, so to say. So moving to Leeds, of course, it completely opened my eyes. It brought me a different perspective. And in Leeds, the focus seems to be more on access to essential services and a more improved infrastructure. As an immigrant and a master's student in Leeds, navigating this new environment really made me appreciate the role that the city can play in providing this framework for a secure and why not sustainable life. My studies in international law and global governance have definitely solidified this. And I think that this well-functioning idea of city should have the mechanisms, laws, and regulations that promote not just economic development, of course, but also environmental sustainability and social equity. And for me today, city means this complex ecosystem, which is a place that can foster, of course, the sense of community, but it also provides the infrastructure for the decent standard of living. And it helps the citizens to commit to promoting not just growth, but also it's a place where it commits to strive and go for goals, important goals in terms of sustainability and social justice. So it's important because it's a space that we can establish the roots, but we can also contribute in this place and thrive within this place.
Thanks, Gabriel. Mathilde?
For me, I think the city is a place where a lot of people can gather together. Since I'm from a big city, I think the city means a lot of things where I live. But at the same time, since I had the opportunity to live in two different cities, in two different continents, I think I see now the city as something really where we can see sometimes the inequality in the world, but also the beauty of how people can gather together and live and how we are all the same in this world and how the city are a place where people can just be a community.
Thanks, Mathilde. And last but not least, you.
For me, the city, I think of the word opportunity a lot when I think of cities. So personally, in my life, I come from an immigrant family that came from Mauritius and immigrated to France and especially in Paris. So I lived my whole life in Paris until I was 18 and then moved to my studies in Montreal and then Amsterdam and then back to Mauritius. So in every time and in every single period of my life, I saw the city as this kind of huge window of opportunity that I could take. So when it was in Paris, I had the chance to develop myself as a little child and then moved to Montreal to develop my student life. And in Amsterdam, my young adult, young professional career, and then moving back to Mauritius more as an entrepreneur or just, again, once again, a student and a young professional. To me, all of the cities that I came through, I had very different experiences, but every time that I think of where I went, I always think of the different opportunities, the different people that I met, the different career and opportunities that I had.
It's amazing that only the four of you are talking and so different experiences coming through, even just from the individual lives you have been experiencing the city. Jarrett for Philadelphia and New York, and then Gabriel to Leeds, and I will not butcher the Brazilian city, I'm truly sorry. And Mathilde for you to also experience the different cities on different continents, and then you just jumping all around the place. This is hilarious. With that in mind, what does the future of cities mean to you?
For me, the future of city is such an interesting topic. Not to talk much about myself, but I have a background in climate change and environmental governance that is related to the environment is technically related to the future, and especially the future of cities. Now that I live in Mauritius, I think that the future of cities, especially here in small island developing states, it is a future where we are able to meet the cities, like innovation and the industrial thought that we had of cities back then, to the new philosophy that we have with cities that we need to bring, not only because it is pretty much an obligation, but it is a need for our planet, but also for our people. So when I think of the future of cities, I really think of this green circular economy and very much open to a different thought that we had of cities back then. A shift that is very important that goes more into an environmentally friendly aspect.
If I may add, first, I think I agree 100% with what you've just said. And I think that somehow our experience touches in a few environmental questions, especially when you think about the broader sense of sustainability. Of course, what does the future of the city means to us? It's a fascinating question. It's something that makes us imagine a lot of things. And I think that as someone who lives both in a developing and a developed city, the future of the cities really feel important. And I think, as we mentioned, cities are these hubs of opportunities, of innovation, of progress, but they also face huge challenges: traffic congestion, pollution, social inequality. And I think by studying my master, the relationship between sustainability and companies, some of those problems, they arise, and some of how those problems, they interact with the future of cities, it becomes clearer. My recent studies, just to be more specific, are about the European Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which basically is this huge regulation that talks about how companies within the European Union must disclose their impacts in the environment and in people. And it, of course, has a consequence impact on how we perceive city, on how these companies that are influential bodies, actors nowadays, they influence the future of the city. I think that by combining this sort of idea of sustainability and giving some sort of acknowledging that these companies are indeed influential and that some actors are more influential than others to drive change in the city, and the future of the city for me would lie in embracing sustainability. Imagine the city's designed with walkable neighborhoods, with efficient public transport, with green spaces that would also, for example, give quality of life to people, but also mitigate perhaps the effect of climate change. When I think about international instruments that talk about this, I think about the Paris Agreement, which talks about the adaptation, the concept of adaptation, of adapting itself or the city, for example, for the effects of the climate change, and also building resilience, which is, of course, another concept, which is the ability to cope with that. And I think that by having this sort of like local and global perspective at the same time, we can truly make the cities this hub of innovation. And of course, as you mentioned as well, embracing sustainability and what the future of the city can look like.
And Gabriel, I think you hit on one point that I want to tease out a little bit further, which is the idea of the 21st century being one where we're really going to turn the tide back on creating walkable cities. We're about 100 years into an experiment of bringing automobiles into our most dense urban areas. It started slowly and then all at once. And within an American context, this was certainly aided by the development of interstate highways that barreled right through our center cities to make sure that suburbanites would have efficient transportation into those urban cores. The area that I live in is on the periphery that benefits from that immense access into the urban areas through these automotive funnels that bring us into the urban core. And the huge focus right now, at least within the United States, and then I'm seeing it around the world, of making sure that we're pedestrianizing as much as possible is critical. And that happens really in two ways. The first is the all-out pedestrianizing of existing roads, taking a full road, shutting it down to automobile traffic, and making sure that it's somewhere that people want to be, that they want to stay, introduces that third place that invites them to sit down, have a coffee, spend an extra moment. And that's hugely beneficial, not just to the human experience, but also to the local economy. When shops are along a pedestrianized street, they thrive so much better. That's against one that has throughput traffic that's going next to it. And then the second one is the continued push for a complete streets look. Truly, post 1950s, the bulk of transportation engineering has been about one thing and one thing only, and that is throughput traffic. When we think about what is a critical failure for most engineers, for a civil engineer, a critical failure is a bridge collapsing. But for a traffic engineer, a F grade at an intersection is oftentimes a car having a delay of more than 60 seconds during peak hour traffic. That's a delay of more than 60 seconds during peak hour traffic. So that means if you're sitting there on off-peak hours, say 11 p.m., and you have to wait 30 seconds, that to them is a failure in engineering. And that has been the predominant theory for a very long time. And the way that has codified the ways that we've built has been incredibly effective in making sure that cars can get where they need to go quickly, but at the detriment of getting people out of those cars and onto the streets to be part of that community. So when we think about sustainability, cars idling on our streets really has a lot of counterpoints to the bottom line goals that we have. And so introducing more pedestrian-friendly environments and the quality transportation, public transportation, to be able to get them there, provide them those reasonable alternatives is critical, because people are going to do what's easiest. They're going to do what costs the least and what is the fastest. And if that's always the car, then they're always going to choose the car. But if we can continue to design ways that it is cheaper for you to take public transportation than to drive in a car, that it is faster to hop on the subway than sit in traffic, and that will deliver you to somewhere where you would rather be on foot than searching for a parking space, then we're creating cities that are reaching those sustainability goals that we're trying to strive for.
Genuinely agree on what Jarrett, you were saying. I lived for a year in Amsterdam, where it is notoriously known for its bikes and how everyone is using bikes. And what is super interesting in this city is that even though some people want to use cars, the city was created in a way, or just transformed maybe in a way, where bikes are the most appropriate mode of transport. So it's funny and it's very interesting to see how the mentality of the citizens in Amsterdam are influencing the mode of transport of the city. So now, for example, if tomorrow I want to be in Amsterdam and I want to take a car, a lot of people would tell me, listen, it's like a 5-minute route. You can take the bike and it's 10 minutes, and it's very normal for them to use the bike. Same thing as recycling, and same thing as other different sustainability linked subjects and topics. I think what is super important when I think of the future of cities is also the future of how we think about our planet and our world later on. Not to only think about climate change, but also to think about very different social justice issues like inequality. So how everyone feeling safe in a city, is everyone having the same opportunities as anyone? Where are the most important places in a city placed? Is it accessible for everyone? I think it's very much about the mentality of the people that are living in a city, and about also the policymakers and the people in a higher place. Maybe we can talk about this as well. If they are willing to put the effort to change the city in a way that is more accessible to everyone.
For me, I do agree with all of you, what you said. For me, the future of the city is really a representation of how did we adapt to the future for all the issue that we will have in the future, all the challenges, either climate change, either inequality, because I think the cities are real representation of the mentality of moment instant. I think it's a representation of a moment instant in some country. And so I think in the future, the cities will be an example maybe of how did we manage to fight climate change, but also to fight the individualism that we are living through right now, because we are in a world where individuality is more and more publicized. And I think it would be better for a lot of issues and challenges that we will have in the future to the city to represent that we can be solidar and we can have solidarity. And the city as an example that solidarity is an example to fight climate change, to fight inequality, and to fight a lot of different topics. My vision of the future is that the cities become more inclusive and solidar environment.
I would like to go back to one term which I think all of you used, which is sustainability. And I know many of you have the textbook understanding of sustainability, allowing the present to fill its needs and also providing the needs for the future as well. I know that textbook answer. If you want, you can phrase it better. But I would love to understand what sustainability means to you personally.
For me, sustainability is a way to fight the problem that we will face. I think we see a lot of effect of climate change. And for me, sustainability is how can we reduce those effects, but also how can we as a society find solution to those challenges that are already here. Because, for example, in Guadeloupe, a little island which I come from, we have seaweeds that are effects from the climate change. But they are trying to find solution on how to manage those seaweeds since the effect of the climate change is already happening on my island. How can we manage to live with that and to find solution? And I think that's a great definition of sustainability, how to find solution to treat with it, but to not at the same time increase some problems that are existing into our world.
As a person who is studying international law and has this particular interest in sustainability issues and sustainability regulations, especially when it comes to companies and sustainability, I think sustainability for me, relying on some international standards, but trying to make it as my own personal thought, we would combine a myriad of concepts inside one. This might be a blurry concept at some point because it can also encompass a lot of things depending on how we choose to see it, to portray it in this kind of single scenario. I think we can rely on the ECHO 92, which happened in the Rio de Janeiro, that a specific global meeting around the topic of sustainability and sustainable development and climate change. I think it brought us the concept of sustainable development. Some people, especially when it comes to the intersection, some authors claims that sustainability might be this ability within the global capacities we can develop socially as well and regards to the environment, but within the sort of global limits that we have. Not only thinking about, of course, future generations are indeed important, but that's one side of sustainability. And as Mathilde mentioned, her island is adapting to the effects of climate change. So I think it's somehow looking at the present and seeing concretely what, in terms of environmental, social, and economic adjustments we can do in order to accommodate everything that the climate change is expecting from us. And I think the Paris Agreement, which was signed by more than 100 nations worldwide, I think it tackles somehow this sort of problems when it comes with the concepts of adaptation and resilience as well. A way to portray sustainability personally would lean towards making sure that economically, making sure that socially and environmentally, we are within this sort of global barriers whilst we develop ourselves socially and economically, of course, but within what scientifically we can, respecting the boundaries that our planet is requiring us to see daily.
And I think that there's a good word in there. You use the word boundary. And I think about that in terms of our development patterns and what that looks like. One thing that I think about a lot is conservationism. And in the United States, the father of conservationism is President Teddy Roosevelt, who ironically grew up on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, a dense populated city. Of course, he's most famed for more of his work as a rugged cowboy, as a rough rider out in the Wild West, but his root was in the city. And of course, Teddy Roosevelt championed the legislation and got it across to create the national park system in the United States, saying that these places, these are beautiful places of natural splendor that we ought to preserve for the next generations. And that set a movement in the United States that there are various organizations who continue to try to uphold today to conserve specific areas. But when I think about the boundary line of urban environments, it really is about conservation at the end of the day. I had the opportunity to moderate a panel about a year ago between one of the vice presidents at Smart Growth America and the president of American Farmland Trust. So the work of the former was all about how we can create smart growth within our existing built environments. And the work of the latter organization is all about how do we conserve the existing farmland that we have, understanding that once that farmland is paved over, that nutrient-rich topsoil that was created, it takes an incredibly long time to be able to get that back. It takes hundreds of years to be able to get that type of fertile soil back into the environment. And so when we think about sustainability, we have to look at our urban areas as really the bulwarks of permitting additional housing opportunities, additional job opportunities. They have to be the place of yes. They really do. Manhattan, the most densely populated city where Teddy Roosevelt grew up, and it's very different now. There are so many buildings that were built in Manhattan that could not be built today under the existing zoning laws because they're considered too large and dense for Manhattan. And if that's the truth for Manhattan, think about how that looks across the United States. The incremental development patterns that led to these dense downtown cores oftentimes can't be built today. But people continue to be born, the population continues to rise, and it will continue to rise. And so where do those people go? They continue to go to the periphery. That boundary continues to get pushed out further. And as that boundary gets pushed out further, low density communities continue to be built further and further on the periphery of our urban centers, creating sprawl. And it's the complete antithesis of the conservatism that I think is central to the American ethos born in the 20th century. That to me is a key part of this conversation is looking towards those cities as those growth areas. How can they be the places of yes? How can we allow that continued incremental development in the cities to reflect the previous historical typologies that worked well in a way that it's going to save areas that are beautiful areas, whether that be farmland, whether that be full natural landscaping, from being developed for low density communities that don't have the same type of sustainable effect as the type of walkable communities that ultimately I think that we're championing within this conversation.
So I asked myself this question, like Gabriel, you said sustainability is such a huge umbrella word where you can pretty much put anything within the word and tell that it's sustainable or that it goes within sustainability. To me, really, when I think of sustainability as a word and as a concept, it is something that is like a way of thought that we didn't have before. When I think of sustainability, it counters the past century where we really were into expansion and into innovation and creation and creating and doing more and more, like very much more into consumerism and capitalism. I'm very much not putting a critique into consumerism, but I think to me, sustainability, it's a way of thought that is saying, okay, let's try and put on the table the needs that we need today, but now let's think about the needs of the future generations and let's think about future generations. So sustainability, a lot of the time we are thinking about climate change, but we can also think about gender equality. We can think about poverty. We can think about energy, of course, but it is about consuming what we thought was an unlimited resource and trying to put regulations and frameworks to make sure that every kind of single generations that will go after us is still having the same opportunities that we have now.
I would love to understand you guys as emerging leaders and very much out in doing and creating the future we want. What are the three biggest fears or concerns you have regarding the future of cities?
I come from the perspective of being a planner for a municipality. So I work in the public sector and have direct opportunity to be part of the conversation of the future of this community. As far as biggest fears, I really think more about the future opportunities that we have. But there are some things that I think that we ought to be considering when we think about the future of these different areas. And the first one is one that I don't think is discussed all too often. It's not the most exciting topic, but it's the one of making sure that the built environment that we're creating is going to be stewarding a fiscally responsible built environment for years to come. In a lot of ways, the development pattern that we built, at least here in the United States, necessitates that continued growth must be required in order to continue to fund the local governmental systems to make the type of improvements moving forward. If you want to have the dollars to be able to make more sidewalks and crosswalks and pedestrian-friendly environment, if you want to put in additional bike lanes, if you want to do all these types of things, the main mechanic to be able to get a good influx of dollars to do so is permitting continued growth. And that puts us in this strange push and pull in some ways. However, we know that there are types of buildings that we can create that at the end of the day provide more revenue to an area than it costs the municipality to serve with the municipal sewer system and water and any other ancillary services such as public safety, schools, so forth. And so for us to have an environment that we're going to love to live in, we need to be looking at building infrastructure, building communities in a way that's going to be fiscally sound. Because what we're reckoning with right now is outdated 1950s infrastructure that hasn't been maintained because there haven't been the dollars to maintain it. And the lives and well-being of individuals within communities starts to deteriorate when the infrastructure around them deteriorates, when the services start to lack, when the park isn't as manicured as it used to be because there isn't as much dollars to be able to staff the parks department as there was 40, 50 years ago. And so I think that's critical, is to take a look at how communities can be fiscally sound so that they can maintain the incredible assets that they've taken the time to produce. I also think that we need to take a look at making sure that we're creating communities that are fully inclusive within that built environment. And a huge part of that is housing diversity, making sure that for different stages of life, different socioeconomic positions, that there's a place for the person within that community. What we've relied on is this broader housing development pattern where different types of housing exist in different areas. And what that necessitates is to be able to have the relevant workforce, which requires multiple income levels. Folks need to commute, crisscross over top of each other to be able to get to a place where they have good, stable employment. Diverse housing is an opportunity, really, from a supply side standpoint, to focus on poverty alleviation. When people can afford where they live, it's better across the board. And I think with that, we're going to find that our communities are so much more inclusive when at the end of the day, they're built with a housing environment that invites multiple types of people in multiple stages of life, whether you're young and unmarried, whether you're young with a family, whether you have grown children, whether you're aging in place at that point, that there's a place for you within that community.
My biggest fear when I really deeply think about it is anytime I am in a big city, I always sense that there is social disparity and social injustice within cities. I really do feel that there are neighborhoods or places in the cities where sometimes the wealthy and the poor are not meant to be mingled. I am scared of the social injustices that cities are currently having and the future of how far could that go. It is an unfortunate reality that one needs to talk about. There are neighborhoods in certain countries where a certain population is more welcome than another. To me, it is very scary to think of how far can this go. Is everyone maybe welcome to go in these places? Are we really socially accepting everyone in certain places? And are we creating spaces where everyone is welcome? My second fear is more when I think of Mauritius and where I live. It is the loss of cultural heritage that Mauritius is currently having. When I say this, I think of it as Mauritius is a small and developing state that is very economically wealthy. We're the second highest economy in Africa, so we're doing very well in that sense. Where I'm more critiquing Mauritius here is how Mauritius is trying to develop itself as an island is very much mimicking how the West was developing itself back then. So we are creating huge malls, we are creating hotels after hotels, and creating a structure and an architecture in our island that is not our print. It doesn't scream Mauritius, it screams we are trying to become Europe, or we're trying to become the West, the US, and all that kind of state. In this sense, what I'm trying to say is that I'm scared that as we are developing, we are losing the essence of what we were at the beginning. So I'm talking about Mauritius, losing where we come from. So trying to develop ourselves within our own identity. That means emphasizing our fishermen, emphasizing the fact that our little villages are the hearts of our island, and not trying to put malls after malls that look the same just for the sake of this is what development looks like. And lastly, we talked about it a little bit. What I fear a lot, especially here in Mauritius, is the impact of climate change on our island. Are our cities resilient to the impact of climate change? Now, all of these development that I just talked about, the malls and stuff, are they climate resilient? Are we really trying to bring out a climate resilient development? I'm not sure of that, because of course everyone knows about climate change, but our leaders, is our policymakers, is the people investing the money to create these malls thinking of climate change as much as I might be thinking, or our generation is thinking of climate change? I'm not sure. So that's a big fear of mine. Are we really going and advancing in a way where we are thinking of our island before thinking about our pride to develop something that is not really us?
I would say the first one would be that the individual system that we are living in just win, and that in the future, our cities are more and more individual. And so some people are more excluded of some places, like you said. And I think that is one of my biggest fear, that the cities are just built for people to be individual in their own life with their own family and do not think about other. Because in the future, I think it would be an issue for us to be so individuals, because we see that when a community have a problem, it's together that we solve it. So it's better to promote community gathering than individualism. And the second fear that I have is that the impact of climate change that we think we will have in the future is bigger than the thing that we said. The climate change will have a bigger impact, will be more visible, and will have bigger consequences on our cities, our world. And I think maybe we are minimizing the impact of climate change that we will have in some years. That's one of my fear, that we think that in the future, okay, it will be that much degree, but we can still live in, but maybe we cannot. And I think that's a pretty pessimistic way to see it. But sometimes it's great to think that maybe it's not so black and white, and maybe it's gray, not in a good way for our cities. And the third, I think, fear that I have is that we do not change our model of consumption. So if we still surconsummate in our cities, and the leader do not change, and if we still continue to surconsummate and to not be careful of the environment, or not enough for the challenge that are coming for us, if we do not change that, it's my fear that in the future, the impact will be bigger. And if we do not change anything, we will not be able to manage everything that is coming.
It was a tough place to be after three of you have highlighted so much key points about the biggest fears. I think that somehow relate to each piece of your words. I would like to take the opportunity of this moment to think about my home city, Recife, which is a city that stands in the coast side in the northeast portion of Brazil. And according to the 2007 IPCC report, it's recognized like one of the cities that will likely face huge issues when it comes to rising the sea levels. So I think that my biggest fears when I look to my home city would be rising the sea levels and the climate disasters that can happen because of it. So I think the first, which sort of screams in our face, which is the rising of the sea levels, increasing the flooding, erosion, the saltwater intrusion, all of that can impact the way we experience and believe the city. And of course, by that, the city would have to invest heavily in climate adaptation strategies, sea walls, flood barriers. This is really crucial to ensure the long-term survival of Recife. Almost 15 to 20 years ago, the IPCC already sounded the alert. So we need to get back on track on our climate adaptation strategies. The second thing would be the inequality and the lack of sustainability, of course, because inclusive housing, for example, and access to essential service might be unevenly distributed. We know that, we have highlighted it. I think Mathilde, when she talks about the difference between individuality and thinking in a sense of community, I think inequality is one thing that pops out in my head. And of course, a city as one of the most unique cities in Brazil need to adapt and need to address that sort of inequality if it wants to get back on track on a good terms with its development. City leaders would have to adopt a source of ideas ranging from renewable energy sources, but promoting green building practices and making sure that we would have a sustainable transport infrastructure, which would help a lot the life of our citizens. I think my biggest fear I left in the third place, but it actually would come as first, is that the leaders of our city or cities itself, its citizens, would not take climate action seriously enough, which is my main concern. Of course, we do face a lot of problems that are really basic. Having this climate action strategy would come as a second thing, but I think we cannot afford leaving that to think as a second thing. We have to think it like in parallel. We have to think about climate change as well as we have to think about giving access to basic rights to our population. Ultimately, one thing would either help or it would clash with another if we don't take care of access of these two branches of development. Although, of course, the future seems challenging, I like to see the cup as half full. And I think that as cities are this hub of innovation and problem solving, we have today the biggest urban technology hub in Brazil. So I think that by accessing influential actors within the civil society, within the industry, within the management of the city, we can come up with a forecast that would be enough to keep on track for development, especially when it comes to sustainability issues as well as a city.
And I love that Jarrett started on a very positive note that, okay, these are fears, but it's more about the challenges and the opportunities. And then Gabriel just finished on this very high note. And then, of course, let's go to the opportunities. What are the 3 biggest opportunities regarding the future of cities for you?
Just as I mentioned, we have, of course, big challenges in the future, but I think there are opportunities to see in this future. I think the first one would be embracing climate adaptation and resilience. The second one would be fostering innovation and green technologies. And 3, promoting sustainable urban living. I think that by embracing the climate adaptation and resilience, which we talked a bit in this episode so far, for my home city, rising the sea levels can be a catalyst for innovation. It's a challenge, but it also can be an opportunity. Cities such as Recife can become leaders in developing and implementing this climate adaptation strategies. And of course, that would mean creating greener infrastructure, bioswales, and rain gardens to manage stormwater, for example, or even exploring innovative solutions like floating neighborhoods or you name it. I think we have great creators in our home city and that we can rely on this sort of knowledge to make sure we could build from the scratch those strategies. It can be also a case study for other coastal cities like Recife, which are facing some similar challenges. Because climate change, I think one of the great facts that we come across is that although some countries in the global south, they are not the main emitters of CO2 gases, for example, they might be the first one to be hit by climate disaster, which is something that highlights how unequal those things are. The second one would be fostering innovation. As I mentioned, Recife today has the biggest urban tech park in Brazil. And that, of course, would help us promote and invest and see and develop greener technology, invest in renewable energies, rely more and more with wind power and solar power as well. And of course, create new jobs because of it. So we would also be looking at in a sustainability, looking to the environment, of course, but we also would be advancing socially within that sort of planetary boundaries that I mentioned earlier. And I think the third opportunity would be promoting sustainable urban living. Recife today, it's a really car-dependent city. I found this data from 2023, comparing other Latin American countries, and Recife is in the top 10 cities that you lose time in traffic congestion. The main rate is that we lose 116 hours per year only in traffic congestions. And we are a car-dependent city. We have to rethink about our public transportation system and how can invest in this sort of solution can be more effective in the long run. I think that would be a way to put the city back on track and see challenges that may arise in the future as the opportunities to change starting from now.
I really want to bounce back on what Gabriel said because I basically agree with every single point that Gabriel said just now. I think that in terms of opportunities that the cities can bring, it is very important for us to understand that one of the biggest plus that we have is that we're not starting from scratch. There is a lot of things that are being done. I'm currently thinking of a lot of cities in South Africa. A lot of the major cities are already actually established a 2030 or 2050 plan on how they are willing to develop the city. In every single development plan that they have, they are thinking in a sustainable way and thinking in terms of opportunity of how to bring forward the different kind of issues that the cities had and how we can change that into an advantage. So mainly about transport, creating different mode of transport, creating green zones in terms of recycling as well. How can we create a community, engage our communities into making the change within the cities? We're not starting from nothing. And I think it's very important to say, we're not creating a brand new philosophy or a brand new way of thinking. We are really trying to improve what we are having right now in a way that will be good for the future generations, like I said before. It's a great way, like Gabriel said, about innovation. We have a lot of tools that we can actually use for the better good, in a sense. Innovation is super important. Trying to put forward our generation, the young people, what are our ideas for our cities? What do we think we can bring to the table and what can we change? Bringing different kind of sectors as well. So I'm thinking here of Mauritius. How can, same thing about fishermen and a lot of the people that are working into the markets. How can we make sure that the cities that they are in or the villages, we can make sure that we are emphasizing their job and how we can make their lives easier? Let's just say again that we're not starting from zero. And I think it's super important that anything that we're trying to create, we're already halfway there if we are just willing to put the efforts to go in the right direction.
Ton of great points on that. And I think that you're completely correct on the opportunity for young people to have their voice heard. To me, that's the biggest opportunity that we have right now within an American context. The typical way that planning function works is that it's controlled by the local level. The smallest form of government, most closest to your home, is the one that controls the zoning laws and dictates what's approved to be built. And there's a huge opportunity in that. Your local city hall, your local town council is the one that's going to vote to approve or deny a certain development. They're the ones that are going to vote to approve or deny a zoning text amendment to the underlying zoning code, which means that you don't have to write letters to your federal legislators to have your voice heard when it comes to the built environment around you. It's controlled by the smallest, closest level of government to your life. And they request and solicit public comment at these different meetings. And so something that's passionately on my heart is that young people should be showing up, because your voice is so clear when we're talking about climate change. Your voice is so clear when we're talking about social inequality. And I think that when we think about the housing crisis in this country, or just the future of our communities broadly, geez, we should have our voices heard there as well. And so I think it's imperative that young people show up and that they make their voices heard, because oftentimes the people who go up to the podium at these public hearings are not there to say, I am super excited that this new housing is being built. Seldom said. They're usually there to list all the reasons why it's going to be a tough thing for the community to be able to handle. But if young people believe that's the right pathway, then they should be showing up to make that position known. It's completely within your right, and you absolutely should be executing that to be speaking truth to power in a very direct manner. The second thing absolutely is continuing to double down on people-centric design. Some of the points that y'all were making brought to mind this incredible statistic from Professor Donald Shoup, who does a lot of work on parking. He did a study that within urban cores, almost a third of the time, cars are cruising in search of a parking space. So a third of the cars on the road are simply looking for a place to put the car to get out of the car. And the more that we can create environments where people don't have that car on the street searching for a place to park, but they had alternative means to get there, is a step in the right direction. Like it was mentioned, those types of green zones, those places fully pedestrian friendly, fully focused on the pedestrian experience. They have ample bike parking because, geez, it takes a heck of a lot less space to park a bike than it does to park a car. And then the last thing I think is a return towards that incremental development, which touches on what was mentioned previously on we exist in this already built environment. We need to continue to work within what we have right now. And in a lot of ways, the financial mechanisms that we have are geared towards large developers Fortune 500 companies, Wall Street-backed developers are being able to get ample financing to build a huge monolithic office complex, a huge monolithic apartment complex, a large single-family subdivision. Our financial tools are geared towards that. And what that ultimately does is when that's developed, when people are renting in those places, when they're buying from those places, that extracts the wealth from the local community and sends it back to Wall Street. And the way that we used to develop was in a much more incremental way where local entrepreneurs would be the ones to build that small quadplex down the road from them. After they speculated the land and got the entitlements and hired the contractor, it used to be a very local thing. And that local entrepreneur is most likely the one who's going to donate to help with the renovation of the school's auditorium. Probably not going to be the Wall Street company that's hundreds of miles away. And so incremental development not only has local economic benefits, but these are the people who are going to be most in tune with the needs of the community. So encouraging incremental development, taking a look at how can we create the financial tools to support those local entrepreneurs and being those local champions for the type of development patterns that we want to see. That's a winning solution. That is a winning solution for the future of cities. It's going to help our generation accrue wealth, which is a phenomenal way for us to be able to make impact investments into the things we believe in. But ultimately, I think that would contribute to a built environment that is much more sensitive to the local context than somebody who's trying to get the highest and best return for their limited partners in a deal.
I totally agree with what Jarrett said. I was going to say community engagement has an opportunity for the cities. I think for the people to be more engaged in their own cities is a solution for the future of the cities. But also, as you've said about youth engagement, right now it's the politics that are deciding how we should manage our life in some way. And I think by young people to be in those decision-making place and also by the people that are working in some area to be in those decision-making place will change the city, and it's an opportunity. For me, for example, the people that are working in the real estate area and the people that are working in the housing crisis that is happening everywhere in the world, to put in place some politics about affordable housing. I think it's an opportunity for the future of the cities to have affordable housing too, for the cities to be more inclusive. Because without affordable housing, the cities are not really inclusive. We are seeing a lot of big cities like Paris, like New York, are living a big housing crisis. And I think because of the voice of young people, but also the voice of the people working in those areas and seeing those inequality with their voice in the decision-making process, I think it would be a great opportunity and it would be a great way to change our cities in the future. The third opportunity, I think, would be about how to be better prepared to disaster, how our cities can better prepare and how we can maybe create some smart building, maybe work more with green infrastructure, how our city can be prepared to disaster in the future.
I love how not depressed you guys are sounding. This is so good. I also get the feeling that you are actually working on these solutions and these opportunities, which is just heartwarming and so hopeful. So I'm so grateful that you took the time, and I want to be respectful of your time. What is your role in establishing the future of cities?
As a young woman in Paris, I would say my role, I would see myself as the voice of the people who don't have voice right now. So maybe the future generation, the young people that are living in Paris, in the suburb of Paris, but also in French small island that I come from. I think my role would be to be the voice of those who are not heard, to express their opinion and also to gather their ideas and to put them into the decision-making place. Because I think right now, young people do not have the opportunity to speak for themselves. And when, as a young people, we have the opportunity, I think it's great as a role model or as a speaker for everybody to speak about the issues of young people that they are suffering of and will suffer in the future. So I think as young people, our role is to speak for all of us when we have the chance to do it.
I have the great opportunity of being able to work as a planner professionally and really directly engage in these types of conversations. And that's good for me. but I'm only one voice. And I think that only goes so far at the end of the day. There's an organization that I have the opportunity of supporting called the Youth Housing Coalition, which focuses on building that next generation of housing advocates here in the United States. Exactly what I was speaking about previously on, hey, you have the chance to go up to the podium and make your voice heard. How do you do that? What does planning even look like in the United States? It's this convoluted, complex system, and the goal of the Youth Housing Coalition is to demystify that. And another huge portion of that is directly working with organizations, whether it be a larger nonprofit, whether it be a governmental institution, and setting up youth advisory boards directly to that point. We don't want people just to be placated with, okay, yep, I heard you. Thanks for your public comment. Move along. And that still is powerful. I don't want to diminish that. But giving individuals the opportunity that when an organization says, we care about a youth perspective, okay, great. Let's find the way that you can build the board of those champions. So when you have a question on what young people are thinking about a topic, well, you have an expert panel on young people to go and speak to. That's a really powerful thing. And so I love championing the work of the Youth Housing Coalition. I think that the youth advisory boards that they're going to continue to set up and launch are going to be so impactful in giving young Americans the direct opportunity to be part of these conversations, because that's how we craft the future of our cities. By being involved, we found a way to be an incredible voice in so many different issues that we face today. And it's really our time to step up and be the voice for the future of our built environment.
I think this is an absolutely fantastic question. What's our role? It's important to not only criticize and having this really critical mindset about how things are, but how we can effectively change it. My action would be better described in 3 ways. I think advocating for sustainable practices would be one of that. Bridging the knowledge gap, it's also something very important. And last but not least, fostering collaboration. By advocating for sustainable practices, as a person who has an interest in sustainability and have this background in international law and global governance, I think that my studies and my future career would help my home city, for example, to advance when it comes to legal frameworks and policies that promote sustainable development within the city itself. This could involve, for example, pushing for regulations that encourage energy efficiency in buildings or incentivizing business to adopt more sustainable practices. By bridging the knowledge gap, I believe that knowledge sharing is, of course, essential. And I think that by participating in discussion like this podcast in itself, it can help people to raise awareness about the challenges and opportunity that we're currently facing in the cities, of course. And that can also have a ripple effect, which will inspire other young people to raise their voices and talk about their perspective and how they want the future of the cities to look like as well. And of course, fostering collaboration. I think when it comes to sustainable development goals, the 7th thing is often, I think, overlooked. But I think if we look through the lens of fostering collaboration and how important it is to have in different sectors thinking about the future, it's something that will really help us advance in every single goal that we have before the 17th Sustainable Development Goal. And the collaboration between governments, businesses, NGOs, and citizens is, of course, essential. And I think that this dialogue will often help us come up with encouraging innovative partnerships, relying on the sort of body of knowledge that we already have happening in the whole world with cities that are facing the same problems, such as our cities. And then by building this partnership, we can certainly thrive in harmony with the environment, with international regulations, of course. And I think, of course, the future is not predetermined. I think we can all shape it, and everyone has a role to play. Although we have to put city leaders accountable, business leaders accountable as well for the impact that they do in communities, in the environment, we can also sort of back our voices, so to say.
I think as young people, our role resides mainly in our force of collaboration. Events like this one kind of establishes a connection for young people who are aiming to become leaders in their own respective fields. But if we look closely to the 4 people, we are from all around the world. It is through these kinds of events, podcasts, thematic discussions like these that we are able to create the networks that is afterwards needed for us to make a change. So I think my specific role in itself would be to continue advocating for what I believe is right for the future of our island or even climate change as a whole or small island developing states, and make sure to shape even more my voice, become even more influential as a young person so that one day when the opportunity comes, when there is a ministerial meeting, first of all, hopefully I'll be invited, but then make sure that my voice is heard at the right time, at the right place, as a young person, but also as a professional, not only as a young person, but as a professional who knows what he is talking about and what he wants to advocate. So the future of cities as a whole is a super important topic that is very much needed. And as a young person, I think our force resides in our collaborativeness, in our strive to make the right change at the right time. And most definitely, why we are very strong is that we are never tired. And I don't think we'll ever be tired to try and make this change.
Which is just so cool. I am so grateful for your time, and I could ask you for hours about social problems and sustainability and resilience and space cities and everything else, but I really want to be respectful of your days. Do you have any closing comments or requests for the audience?
If I may start and rely on everything that has been said today, please don't give up. The future might seem really daunting, but I think with every challenge, of course, it comes the opportunity. So we can have better strategies to walk in the right way. And by the right way, there's no predefinition of what is right, but it can also accommodate the needs of specific cities, what is important to the city, what's important to the community. So please raise your voice and continue to do the good work. And please do hold accountable the leaders. When I say the leaders, I'm not talking about only the politicians that run your city, but also every individual and stakeholders that holds a fair share of power and influence in your city. Sometimes the politicians are not the only one to govern things, but companies, business, they also shape our experience of the city and the communities. So I think my overall comment would be, don't give up, hold people that have to be accountable as accountable, and please do share your voice.
I totally agree with the last word of Gabriel, and I want to encourage all the people that are listening to us that their voice and their ideas are valuable. So please do not be afraid to have a voice in your community, because you're valuable for the part of the world that you are in. And everyone is super valuable for the community that they are in. So together we can make it. And in the future, it would be, I think, positive and great.
I think to go along on that point, Harvey Mollock has a sociological theory that intersects strongly with that point, which is called the city as machine theory. And what that essentially says is that the stakeholders who have the power will be looking for the highest and best economic return for their purposes out of the function of a city. And oftentimes that comes at the denigration of the experience of the resident of that place. And it is a calling, truly, to say that is the truth. If those power dynamics are the ones at play, what can we do to broach the breach and be that voice? And I think we're all calling for that. We're calling for that type of collective action, that type of collective unity around a shared vision of what we want to see our built environment look like, feel like, cost, and function for in our lives. And if we don't, the powers that be will continue to do what the powers do. And so it's a unique opportunity for us to have our voices heard. In American context, they ask for you to participate in this process. So please do. Please, it's your civic duty to be part of this for those who don't have the time in the evening to go to a local public hearing. Show up if you have the privilege of being able to do. And that's how we be a part of this championing environment of making sure that the future we want to see is clearly articulated, not just on Twitter, but also in those different halls of power.
I cannot say much more than what my colleagues just said. So I will end with a question to the audience. How do you think that youth should shape the future of cities? Put your answers in the comment section. I'll make sure to read them and I'll try and answer them if I can.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a blast to have you on, and I just love these final requests. The question will be posted on Spotify and also on the blog where the episodes are usually posted. And again, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Fanny.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this was lovely. Pleasure to meet everybody.
It was really interesting to hear the enthusiasm and conviction for youth engagement from the panelists. This hopeful and progressive conversation gives strength to go forward to the new year. Richard Gill, in episode 274, talked about similar positive messages, if you need even more. You can find out more about Jarrett, Mathilde, Gabriel, and you online. All the links are in the show notes. What was the most interesting part for you? What questions did arise regarding the panelists' approach to the future of cities? What have you learned from this panel discussion? Let me know on Twitter at WTF4Cities or on the WTF4Cities.com website where the transcripts and show notes are available. You can also subscribe on the website not to miss any new episodes and leave some feedback. I hope this was an interesting interview for you as well, and thanks for tuning in.
What is the Future for Cities podcast?